4060 Ti is a great way to make a disposable GPU that you're almost forced to upgrade every single year because it's just going to be so limited. Maybe that's the trend going forward. I have here a 3060 Ti, the previous generation. In some ways, this one is better, and this one was $399. I'm not so sure the new one's going to come in that low of a price considering Nvidia's raising all of the prices. We're going to talk about why this one has some better specs. You're going to be actually shocked at especially the VRAM, and this is an issue that I think is going to be serious because games now need VRAM. What's Nvidia doing? I mean, they're the ones pushing ray tracing, right? DLSS 3 is not going to solve every single issue that they have, even though they're pushing it pretty hard. VRAM is absolutely necessary for high textures, for all of the ray tracing that people want to do. And you might say maybe you don't turn on ray tracing on the 4060 Ti, but technology has to progress. I mean, it has to be a technology, if it's going to be good in the future, that starts to trickle down to all of the GPUs, not just the 4090 or 4080. So definitely the 4060 Ti, I do not like what I'm seeing, and I think we can make accurate predictions because if we saw the specs of the 4070 Ti, just like now, before it launched, many things were a red flag, like the 192-bit memory bus. The 12 gigabytes of VRAM kind of make you have to choose the bit bus that you're going to do. And of course, Nvidia is going to go with the cheaper type of VRAM. But even before testing the GPU, you know that's going to present an issue. It has the power to run 4K at good FPS, just like a 3090 Ti did. But when the VRAM starts to kick in with like ray tracing and high textures, higher resolution, you start to really feel the pain on that GPU. And the 4060 Ti is going to bring it down a notch. Take a look at this guy, 3060 Ti, 256-bit GPU. The memory bus on this guy is a whopping 256 bits. That's going to be a whole lot more than the paltry 128-bit memory bus that allegedly is coming on the 4060 Ti. Now, memory bus and bandwidth, which is going to be a lot faster on this guy, is still important. Of course, the 4060 Ti will be a faster GPU in terms of rasterization, and in general, it's going to have a good amount more power than this, much like the 4070 Ti has a slower bus, but faster than the 3070 Ti, etc. So I'm not saying that, but in some scenarios, in some situations, it's possible this GPU could do a little bit better than the 4060 Ti because of that VRAM limitation. The 128 bits is kind of like shockingly low because the 4070 Ti was already a bare minimum, in my opinion, of 192-bit bus. 128 definitely brings it down an entire notch. And of course, they have to make certain decisions with how the bandwidth will be depending on the amount of VRAM, and it's going to be 8 gigabytes of VRAM, same thing as in this one. So that's another big issue. Is 8 gigabytes of VRAM enough for a GPU of this caliber in 2023? In my opinion, absolutely not. For a 4060 Ti, it should be absolutely 12 gigabytes minimum. I mean, look at AMD 6700 XT. That one has the 12 gigabytes. Why does the new GPU have to be 8 gigabyte minimum? You could say, okay, the 4060 Ti, you're not going to be playing 4K with it, most likely. That I do agree. But 1440p starts to push a lot of textures, and even if you do some mild ray tracing, even the Intel Arc A770 has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and that's a $350 GPU that can do ray tracing rather well. Nvidia has one big advantage in ray tracing. They're going to start to give it up because their hardware is not going to be powerful enough with the VRAM to be able to take advantage of it. If I was buying a 4060 Ti, even playing at 1440p, that's definitely something that would concern me. While it may function nicely now and you may get some good FPS, in the future it's gonna start to realize some pretty big bottlenecks as game textures start to get more complicated. Unreal Engine 5 is pretty demanding on graphics hardware, and of course ray tracing and things like that is something that every single game going forward has a good chance of implementing it, and it just really taxes that VRAM. To add insult to injury, I highly doubt the 4060 Ti is going to be $399 like this guy was. So while no doubt that the new 4060 Ti in general is still going to perform better than this, it's very disappointing news to see that limited of a memory bandwidth considering everything that I just said with all of the technical innovations going forward in PC gaming. So what what exactly is Nvidia doing? The specs on the 4060 Ti seem to me like it should be maybe a 4050 or one of their lower tier GPUs, and not on something that definitely is not going to cost $399. I mean, it's probably going to be at least $499 for that 4060 Ti. And of course, I guess they can't give it a crazy fast VRAM, because then what about the 4070 Ti? They would have to admit they really made a mistake there, which I think they did. So we're in a kind of an interesting space here. Way before the launch of this GPU, we can see some massive shortcomings. And if these specs are true, possibly, of course, it could be a little bit off, it could be a little bit better, but it's still going to be less than a 4070 Ti. So you know that the specs just aren't there, and we know how games work and how technology works. So we can kind of guess from afar that the result is going to be really, really not all that great. And the other big problem that they have is not only AMD, they're probably going to release GPUs that compete with the 4060 Ti that have more VRAM. I mean, that's what they did last generation with 12 gigabytes and different things like that. Even on average, their RX 7000 series GPUs like the 7900 XT and XTX, they have 20 and 24 gigabytes of VRAM. Only the 4090 has 24 gigabytes. Everything else is 16 or below. So Nvidia is putting themselves into a corner here. And of course, you could say that DLSS 3 is one of their argument points. They're really pushing it hard. There was just a plugin released where it's going to be more widely available. Unreal Engine 5 is going to have it. So no doubt that future games going forward, the support is going to increase. And while I happen to like DLSS 3 in games like Hogwarts or Cyberpunk, I think it definitely makes it a lot better. It shouldn't be the selling point of the GPU, and it should not make up for weak hardware, because after all, even with DLSS 3, these memory bandwidth problems are still an issue. A 4070 Ti doesn't all of a sudden become much better at high resolution because of DLSS 3. It still hits some bottlenecks simply because those limitations are in place. So the price of the 4060 Ti is going to make it an expensive GPU with a lot of limitations. The biggest problem here as well, there's still a lot of last generation GPUs that are very viable and generally may even be faster for most people at similar or less of a price. For example, if you present to me like a used 6900 XT or even like a 3080 Ti, which may start getting close to that $600 range, and a third-party AIB 4060 Ti also gets close to that $600 range most likely, which one would you choose? I mean, even though the other one doesn't have DLSS 3 or anything like that, it's going to have both of them much better VRAM, and I even think in rasterization they're going to be much better than this, because it takes a 4070 Ti to even beat a 3090 Ti. So a 4060 Ti or a 4060, those are going to be probably around the level of sort of the higher to lower mid-range GPUs that Nvidia and AMD had last generation. So then what's the incentive? I mean, DLSS 3 is the only thing they can use to upsell these GPUs, because performance-wise, I'd rather have a high-end GPU from last generation than anything, honestly, beneath the 4070 Ti. You can definitely match it with something from last year, which you still have the regular DLSS and FSR, so it's not like you don't have any upscaling at all. And while I do think upscaling technology is something that developers are starting to implement more and more, at the end of the day, limited hardware specs is going to be a really big issue, and Nvidia is just making this like a one-generation GPU. Look at the 1080 Ti, for example. That lasted for multiple generations as being a viable GPU, but unfortunately, I don't see that happening with any of these new GPUs that Nvidia is releasing, because they're limiting them in a very, very severe manner. The only one that probably has really good future, proofability, if you will, is the 4090, but that one is so expensive that it's only for a select group of people. Everybody else is getting basically disposable GPUs. Makes sense on Nvidia's side, right? They want you to upgrade every single year. All right, guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.